Item number 18, amendment to the Code of Ethics for the City of Pensacola. Ms. Sharon Arnold.
Yes, I brought these amendments to the Code of Ethics forward out of concern that the more technology we have today, people using iPhones and text messaging, the more it becomes difficult to keep track of public records. And so I did some research on the definition of public records under Florida statute. And so I put a definition of public records in the ethics ordinance that conforms to the definition of public records, letters, emails, cell phones, text messages, anything basically can be a public record. The other thing that I did...
Ms. Myers, I need for you the recommendation, so I need read recommendation, then we can get a motion in a second, and we can go into some things.
Okay, let me find the recommendation.
It's recommendation on you have it?
I got it.
Okay,
All right.
okay.
Recommendation. The City Council amend the Code of Ethics for the City of Pensacola, Section 2, Tac 6, Tac 2, to include a definition of public record, and that Section 2, Tac 6, Tac 3 be amended to prohibit city officials and employees from destroying or otherwise dispose of such records, and from refusing to make such records available to the public. Further, that Section 2, Tac 6, Tac 3 be amended to prohibit conduct intended to interfere with a person's constitutional right to inspect records. So that's the motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second here. So, Councilmember Bear.
I didn't want to talk. I just...
You don't want to make a motion? Okay, so Mrs. Myers will speak a few more minutes on it, and then Mr. Wingate for second.
Yes, I want. I'm going to speak to the motion. I did consult with our assistant city attorney, Mr. Wells, regarding the drafting of this. I also consulted with Barbara Peterson, the director of the First Amendment Foundation in Tallahassee, who provided some language for these amendments. So basically it does three things. One, it defines broadly what public records are. It also requires that public records be retained in keeping with the retention requirements established by the Department of State. That was language that Ms. Peterson suggested. And thirdly, it prohibits conduct that would interfere with a person's right to inspect or copy records. Finally, the last sentence says, persons engaged in conduct prohibited herein shall be deemed to have violated this ordinance and shall be subject to the penalties set forth herein, including those set forth in Florida Statute 119. So that's basically what the amendments do.
Thank you. Councilmember Wingate.
I just want to ask, is this in addition to the public records laws that are already in place? Is this above and beyond what's already required?
What this does is it gives us a local enforcement in terms of the conduct of elected officials and city employees and those persons who are custodians of public records. If there's a violation under Florida law, normally a person would have to go over to the state attorney's office and file a complaint. But what this does, it puts it in our ethics ordinance, and the penalty is the same for violating any of the provisions of our ethics ordinance. So that's what it basically does. It gives us a a means of addressing conduct here at City Hall, a person could still go to the state attorney's office because there are no criminal penalties in this ordinance. So it's would be enforced the same way any ethics violation would be enforced.
Mr. Wells, do you have a comment on Mr. Wingate's question?
I would agree with what Ms. Myers has said about it. Like, for instance, the definition in this ordinance of public records is more specific, more inclusive than is the statutory definition that you'd find in Chapter 119. Specifically, it includes a reference to emails, cell phone records, and text messages. Those words aren't in the statutory definition, but you certainly see them in the case law that comes up under there. And it does dovetail back into the retention schedules that are published by the state, so that officials, you all, and the employees of the city are all in sync with the retention records of the state. Many records are retained permanently. Some records are 4 years for the most part. Others are cell phone messages or text messages are regarded as transitory, and you can delete them when they've lost their value. And so the only really concept that's in your ethics ordinance that's not expressly in the state statute is the sentence that no elected or appointed public official, city employee, agent of the city, vendor, or any person who has custody of a public record shall deter, interfere with, or prevent any person's right to inspect or copy public records. It's a sort of a non-retaliation or no deterrence ethics responsibility of public officials and employees of the city.
Ms. Wingate, did that answer the question?
Well, I guess the other side of it is what is going to be our enforcement mechanism for this?
It's the enforcement mechanism of the ethics ordinance that the council adopted some time ago when the new charter came in 2010. There's a provision in it that requires you to adopt your own code of ethics for the city of Pensacola. You did do that. It has an enforcement scheme where council enforces the ethics violation of its own members. The mayor enforces the ethics obligations of the city workforce, since under the charter he hires and fires and disciplines. And so that's the enforcement scheme.
Okay.
Councilmember Tahar?
Thanks. I have two questions, kind of to clarify Councilman Wingate's question. So if we do pass this, then if we are supposedly violating a public records law, we would go in front of the ethics committee for the city in lieu of the state, or in conjunction with the state? Would it basically go in front of both, or is that
the State Ethics Commission enforces the state ethics statute. The public records law, Chapter 119, is separate. It's enforced by individuals whose claim their rights have been denied, or the state attorney's office. And this would be enforced by you for yourselves and the city staff by the mayor.
And the only other question is, on here it says papers, letters, photographs, blah, blah. Like, when I get to my desk here, I get this thing, and I think it's got a photo in it. Does this become a public record now because I get it in a council meeting? Or, I mean, would I have to keep this for 10 years or 5 years?
Wherever the original of it is the public record.
Okay. So, if this is the only one, then I need to file this somewhere.
Be careful.
I've been screwing up a lot lately then. Okay, thanks.
Any other comments from council?
I have a
Yes, Spencer.
and may I direct it to our legal
Yes, you may.
representation. Thank you, Chair, this evening. Mr. Wells, where is the timing addressed? Since that seems to be an issue, I understand certainly now there is language that helps basically clarify, I would say, the culture or the interchange in which the person requesting, the individual requesting public information is to be, it is stated clearly how they are to be treated and handled in a non-threatening sort of atmosphere. But where is the timing addressed regarding delivery of those public records?
In the statute itself, Chapter 119 speaks to the urgency of responding to the request. It has to be produced in a reasonable amount of time. If a person has to go to court, the individual has to go to court to enforce it, it's advanced on the docket, it's priority over most all other judicial matters. But I think that this ordinance wouldn't affect the timing apart from whatever state law requires. That would still remain.
Okay.
Councilmember Myers, and I have two people from the audience that would like to speak.
Yes, I would just like to kind of direct my question to Attorney Wells. It's my understanding that the State Ethics Board has been tasked with redrafting Florida state ethics laws, and that they will be putting in the state ethics law an open record component. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think I first learned about it from the 4 council members who went to the Florida League of Cities annual meeting in Hollywood a couple of weeks ago, and the state has passed the state legislature passed a new law directing the Ethics Commission to develop a training program. It's effective January 1 of 2015, where all of the elected municipal officials, all of you, all over the state, people like you all over the state, are going to have a 4-hour mandatory training session developed by the Commission on Ethics, delivered by, in conjunction with the Attorney General's office and other agencies as well. It includes public records, it includes sunshine law, and it includes the ethical obligations of voting and financial disclosure. You'll have to disclose on your financial form each year from now on that you have to certify on that form that you've completed your mandatory 4 hours of training each year from now on. It's my understanding that the Ethics Commission, as part of developing that training package, is going to be recommending to the legislature some refinements of the statute, refinements of the public records law. I mean, you're not asking for my personal opinion, I understand, so that ends what I know. My personal opinion, as our discussions have been recently on the telephone, is that the law has some catching up to do with technology. I think we all know that. All of us who have a smartphone, and I've got one of each kind, it leaves you scratching your head about how do I do things with these phones. And so I have a feeling that the Ethics Commission is going to be charged with clarifying how it works, given the technology that we have.
So my point in asking you that is to let council know that these amendments really are amendments that apparently the Ethics Commission is going to be looking at for state ethics laws. So this just kind of puts us in the forefront of this issue, and so I see no harm in it. I think it's good to put employees and public officials on notice as to what records are and how they're to be maintained, and the constitutional rights of the public to view records, and to give us some local enforcement over that through our ethics ordinance. So I hope that council will pass it.
Councilmember Bear.
Thank you, Madam President. And, it's not uncommon for cities to go beyond what's printed at the state level. I know Broward County has a very, very aggressive ethics program, ethics commission. They have their own training. They've been doing training for years. In fact, at the League of Cities conference, they have their own ethics training, which they invite everyone else to come to. It's not 4 hours, unfortunately, so it won't meet their requirement. For next year, they have to lengthen it a little bit. But really, what I see this is, someone who has released just about everything in a public records request shortly after I got on council, including text messages, including Facebook messages, everything. There's a way to do it. It's not always the most convenient way to do it, but I think making it clear that emails are public records in our code of ethics, I think, is important. And I also think having some accountability for people that are supposed to release these public records is also important. So I support this change to our ethics code, and I think that you're going to see more as someone who is actively looking at the ethics on a state level in the League of Cities and on one of their subcommittees. I think we're going to continue to see more rigorous requirements for elected officials. So I fully support this, and I hope that the rest of the council will as well.
Thank you. I support this as also, and I feel that after we have our ethics training after January, because we have to wait until after January to have that training. It was a very eye-opening training at the League of Cities in Hollywood, and talking about some of the technology issues, the Facebook, the blogging, and our accountability as elected officials. So I do feel that after we have our training after January, that we will come back with some more up-to-date and more revisions in reference to our code of ethics. I have two individuals that would like to speak. Ms. Dottie Duberson.
Yes, good evening, Council, and thank you for your service, as always. I rise to support this amendment. I think you probably all expected that I would, because I do believe the more information citizens have, the more record of why decisions are made, the better the future actions can be. I've been in many meetings where people have questioned, why did this happen or that happen, and people would say, well, we don't know. They go to the minutes, and the minutes only have the official actions, but the conversations that take place and the notes that are shared from people and the reports that are given by individuals at those meetings get lost if you don't have the documentation that has been passed forward. With technology changing, there's going to be ways developed to capture so that what right now is a cumbersome process will be changed. So I believe that by stating that you're going to be attempting to make everything available as openly as you can, you are opening yourselves to being the transparent government that we all thought we were going to get. Thank you.
Thank you. Nathan Moore.
Well, I am also a huge fan of transparency in government, but also knowing what I know about technology, I'm a little hesitant about this because I'm concerned about how practically a couple of these things will work. For example, with an email exchange between a city council person and a constituent, or a city council person, staff person, or whatever, that tends to have a pretty linear thought process. Text messaging, however, oftentimes is much more personal, and you can get into a lot of different stuff and then hop back onto topic. And how are they going to cut that information that's pertinent to the public records request, or will they be required to just turn over the entire text message conversation? I mean, and then if someone is suspect of having text messaged someone, and then that becomes a public record, and they don't want to hand that over, would their cell phone be taken from them, and then all of their private conversations, pertinent data, I mean, banking information, whatever they have on their cell phone would then have to be handed over to someone else? The same with phone records. Would they only have to hand over the part of the phone record that had information about the person that you suspected that they might have called, or would they have to hand over the entire phone record for the months in which you were requesting that information? I'd like to know how those things would work.
Ms. Myers?
Well, you certainly have raised some very interesting and complicated issues, and this is why we need to address this. I will tell you that I get more messages from public officials from their iPhones that they have personal control over than I do emails. And, of course, people don't text message me anymore because I don't know how to text. And so, you know, I don't delete text messages that I get, quite frankly. Don't know how to do that either. But the issues you've raised are the issues that we're struggling with. You know, the more technology we have, the more, and it's controlled by individual devices rather than your city-owned computer or city-issued cell phone, the less and less transparency we have in government. But your personal emails and personal messages are exempt. I mean, unless it has something to do with the government's business. And perhaps our assistant city attorney can elaborate on that, but certainly somebody doesn't have the right to get your private emails and you know, phone records, but just that portion that has to do with the government's business.
Well, I guess my concern just working in the area of this, you know, social media and data and that sort of thing, I wonder how people are going to pull aside just that information. How are they going to, if you have a text message conversation, how are they going to be required to screenshot that? Well, how will they separate it from the rest of the conversation? I feel like this might be something that needs to be looked at a little bit more in depth to answer some of those more intricate questions, because, you know, I had a business contact one time. I lost their telephone number. I had to find that telephone number, and so I got my cell phone service to send me all of my telephone calls, because they couldn't just send me that, you know, from this area code, could you send me all of those telephone calls? So I got all of the thousands of telephone calls that I made in a day or in a month, and they just sent me all of that data. Would that be what has to be turned over, that whole record? And so then you could see who they were communicating with, and I don't know, I feel like this needs a little bit more investigation.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments on that.
Okay.
One of the comments that they made at the League of Cities for elected officials is using your personal cell phones and your personal computers to carry out city business in that, and therefore they made a note of caution in that, and we'll clarify some of those things later when we get the workshop. But your personal items, if you do not get or use your personal cell phone or your personal computer at home to receive city business, but if you, once you open that door and use your personal devices, then you have opened possibly the door to get that information in reference to public records. I have Councilmember Johnson, then Dr. Wu, and then Dr. Pratt, and then Spencer.
Thank you, Madam President. And what I'm hearing is confusion. I'm hearing confusion from Councilperson DeHar. I'm hearing confusion from Mr. Spencer, and from Mr. Monk raised some great questions. I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. We've got Florida statutes, I believe, take effect January 1. I think there's confusion here. You know, we already have something before us. We have something that's going to be addressed here in Florida statute. It already is. I think this is confusing to us, to me, to the public, it sounds like, to other council people. And I think this is just, I'm not going to be supporting this tonight. I'm saying that at the risk of being threatened with another lawsuit. But I'm going to not vote in favor of this tonight. I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for bringing up some very good points. I think we're at the point where I don't think is a clear, straightforward issue. Florida Commission on Ethics is working to put together that 4-hour workshop and what the guidelines are. And to me, it seems like maybe prudent to wait to see what they've come up with and then go from that point. So personally, I'd like to wait until we get more of this cleared up and vote on something not completely cleared on. I believe that part of this is exacerbated because somebody asked for a review of a former employee's records. Well, at the time, I don't think that former employee had the opportunity to go through their materials and expunge anything that was personal, which is all right. And my understanding, and of course my understanding is secondhand, that since that person wasn't provided with everything that was in that box, that's where we probably are one of the reasons we are where we are. But I reiterate, that person whose material was in that box has the right before anybody sees it to go through themselves and expunge anything that is not city business. So, having said that, it's not to say I won't support it in the future, not to say I don't understand the basis you're coming from. All I'm saying is at this particular time, I'm not ready to support it. Thank you, Madam President.
Dr. Craig?
Thank you, Madam President. I wasn't necessarily going to speak on this. I already came in with many of the concerns Mr. Monk raised. I think that our public records laws are confusing already. I think that, for instance, the point Madam President raised, if I do city business on my personal computer, my personal phone, I don't have a city phone, I don't have a city computer. So often I receive emails from people who know me saying, hey, I hope you'll vote for this, and they send it to my personal email. Does that now open up my personal email? To the point of wanting to know how we reached a decision. You know, it's sad, but most of the time after my kids have gone to bed, my husband and I discuss city business. I'm not going to carry a tape recorder to bed for pillow talk. I'm not sure. I don't think that should be public record. You know, how we reach decisions is done in a myriad of ways, and it's not all recordable. There's a lot that is recordable. You know, when city emails are sent out, there's a notice at the bottom. If you send an email back, your email becomes public record. In this, possibly, the city's phone system is internet-based. Every phone call, every voicemail you leave to the city phones could be recorded, could be reported out. We should have a warning. You dial a city number, there should be a voice recording. Your number may be retained. You might want to hang up because you might not want the telemarketers that I've had for the last month calling. I think that there needs to be a thorough investigation statewide, and I think that this is one of the issues that I don't want to be at the forefront. I think there's so many potential legal landmines that open up well-meaning citizens. We just appointed several people to boards. They're all going to be subject to that. Their personal email, their personal computers, their personal phones are now going to be public record issues. And I think that is a real concern. I understand the desire for information, but it almost becomes so cumbersome that people don't record things written because it becomes an issue, and so they only speak. So you get even less information. So I will not be supporting this tonight. I hope that there is a better communication system developed, because I find, for me, the information I get from conversations with people is much more informative than anything I've seen them have written. One last thing. In terms of retraction, my understanding when I've had public records, the only thing I could retract was personal health information or information about my children or things like that. If I said anything, snarky or whatever, it could be released. I mean, that's the only stuff that, if there was an email that said, yeah, I'll support your issue, and, you know, I liked your hat, the I liked your hat stays in there. So, thank you.
Councilmember Spencer?
Thank you. I think the intent that Councilwoman Myers has, there's some validity to better defining the, most importantly, the procedure, the access of obtaining the request for access to public records. And I have heard of some instances in which those that have requested public records perhaps haven't been treated as, let's just say, as well as they had expected and as well as they deserve. And that is something none of us are proud of. However, I am, as this conversation has continued, I can think of just within the past 2 weeks of individuals that have feared their identity being revealed as they have discussed issues in which they feel there have been perhaps transgressions, and they are involved in business, they're property owners, and they don't want to be identified. But yet they do want me as a representative to do what I can to extract information on their behalf so that they can help form their decisions, plans of action. And from what I'm seeing tonight is that that access to me as a representative, they would fear that their conversation with me, the record of phone calls, would very much jeopardize my role as a representative in assisting them. And that's just one example. But within the past 2 weeks, I'm trying to help people that don't want to be identified, and I can understand why they don't want to be.
Thank you. Mr. Wingate?
Well, these public record laws are already in place and are already being used. This is not something new that this is generating. This is already the law, and it's already being used around the state. This is not just something that takes place because of this ordinance that we're talking about. This is nothing new.
And Councilmember Myers?
Yes, I want to reiterate what Councilman Wingate just said. This language in this ordinance changes nothing. Nothing. This definition of open records is the definition of open records in the Florida statute and case law. Read your Florida and the Sunshine Manual. Your obligation to respond to open records, you have to do that anyway. Even if you don't pass this, it changes nothing. Nothing. Under state law, the definition of open records is consistent with this ordinance, and your obligation to maintain records under state law, it says, in keeping with state law. This change, if you don't pass this, you've changed nothing. The only thing that this changes is that it's in our ethics ordinance, and the enforcement mechanism is the same for anything else in our ethics ordinance. So if you don't pass this, you haven't gotten yourself out from under anything other than our ethics ordinance. You still have to abide by Florida law, both the statutes and the case law. All this does is provide some direction for public officials and staff that our ethics ordinance can also be used to enforce what the people already have a right to under Florida law, rather than having to go across the street to the state attorney's office. That's all it does. That's it.
Thank you. Councilman Johnson, did you Did you make that?
Well, I mean, thank you, Madam President. I wasn't going to say anything else, but if that doesn't change anything, then why do we need it in the first place? I mean, there's confusion here. Until I get a city cell phone, someone purchased me a city cell phone. As you notice, I have two computers right here. I never access my city computer, but with city business. So until I get a city cell phone, it's going to be real tough for me to try to keep up with retaining those, and I'm confused with this. Mr. Monk brought up some great points, so I'm going to, again, vote no, and Ms. Myers really made my case for me, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Either way it goes, as a council, we will be having to deal with this issue after January. We will have to be able to deal with and come up with some suggestions, solutions after January, after we have our code of ethics, our text messages, our blogging, our Facebook. It will all come back to us again in January, and we must be ready to take care of it. If it does not pass, I want to encourage Councilmember Myers to get with Mr. Wells so that we can go through and answer the questions and the concerns, because this will come back to get us. We've already been forewarned that this issue of social media will come back, and we must address it. Since there are no other comments, would you please vote? Okay. The motion fails 4-5. We will not be reading the ordinance.